So anyway, let's get started. A couple of items in front of the committee members. There is information from Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks regarding their EDIF requests. And there is a memo from the Kansas Department of Agriculture that gives us the answers regarding conservation district salaries and benefits. So you can look through that and kind of see why conservation needs more money to retain good employees. And then there's also a list of their project types. So I would invite you to study those. Representative Ruff.
Which one is the EDIF?
The one that starts with KDWP.
Oh, right there. Okay, I thought this was 2 pages. I'm sorry.
Yeah, there's a single page from Wildlife and Parks and 2 pages, two pieces from Kansas Department of Agriculture. So I would like to commend my agencies for following up and answering the questions that committee has had this session and providing us with that hard copy information. I feel like that's very valuable.
I agree.
Okay, so, yes.
I know this morning we had a little bit of an update on EDIF, so, and I think they said that the Kansas Wildlife and Parks, some of that was restored, but we didn't see that on our form, right?
I think most of it was stripped, actually.
Okay.
So-
So we're still waiting to know what the Senate
Yes,
does
just
with EDIF.
we wait with bated breath.
Gotcha.
To see what happens to the budget. So, but we did good work in here.
Yes, we did.
Rest assured that we did good work. Okay, today's program is with the Kansas Geological Survey. Mr. Jay Kalbus is the director of the Kansas Geological Survey and also the state geologist for Kansas. We have a thick program from him, and we're gonna have a good presentation and questions. Write down your questions as he presents, and then we will have those following his presentation. So, Mr. Kalbus, welcome to committee.
Madam Chair, thank you so much. I do indeed have a dense technical pack for you all. I'm hopeful that it's going to be shockingly cool and really surprising. I love to play on the idea of what most people think geology is versus what it really is, which is defense and water and economics and science and science and science and engineering. So hopefully this will be fun and entertaining. I also realized that I've got like 70 slides and it's after lunch, so apologies for that. But like I said, I'll do my best. So I'll rely heavily on the slides. You've got a deck. That slide deck is everything that I'm presenting here today. So I'll go ahead and get into it. We may need to, there we go. Okay, it's going. There's a little delay. No problem. Okay. This slide. So this map is the percentage change in the aquifer thickness. So think of this as the water table thickness of the High Plains Aquifer. So this is looking from the western border of the state of Kansas through to central Kansas, almost to Sedgwick County. The thing that I want you to take away from this map, and I should orient you, the dark colors on this map show areas where we have greater than 60% of the aquifer thickness is now gone. So that means that we've used more than 60% of the water available in the High Plains Aquifer since effectively the start of industrial irrigation. What this map is a highly sophisticated product. It's the work of dozens of experts every single year to go out and measure by hand the data. We go and we measure, we remeasure, we QA and QC the data, and then we get it out very, very quickly into farmers' hands, into ranchers' hands, and into state agency hands, into public hands. I would argue, and I think many would argue, that this is the most impactful scientific product ever produced in the state of Kansas. I think you can make a fair argument for that. Why? Because it's a call to action. And it's a way for Kansans, for individual farmers, to manage their resource, to manage the water that's under their feet. So it's a window into one possible future based on empirical data, where we are today. And I'm going to show you exactly what we do with this. But first I want to go on to something else that's different and I think most people don't think of as geology. So the KGS is internationally recognized as a center of excellence in shallow geophysics. Shallow geophysics, in contrast to deep geophysics, is a very niche, very technically difficult area to operate. It's because you have a lot of interference, and so seismic waves, when they pass through the earth, it's very difficult to disaggregate noise from signal shallow in the Earth's surface. What you're looking at here on this slide in the lower left is a bobcat with a very specialized source. It's a seismic source on the front of it. And we're operating here at the border with Mexico. So this is right on the US-Mexico border. And what we're doing is we're using that bobcat and then a seismic array on the back of that to go and look for shallow voids, to look for smuggling pathways where bad guys are moving goods and people and drugs into the state of, into this was Arizona, but into the United States. The DEA agent on the upper right is standing in one of the tunnels that we found. Now, how does that relate back to Kansas? Well, we developed this technology here in the state of Kansas initially because we were looking for caverns. We were looking for mine collapse hazards. We were doing those hazard collapse resource assessments. So we developed this very specialized technology with a large research group in shallow geophysics to do this work, to do things like look for sinkholes, working with the Department of Transportation, for example. I'm going to show you kind of what that looks like. The result of this, though, the military and Homeland Security got into what we were doing and saw a use of it. And the result is that we're now bringing in tens of millions of dollars into the state of Kansas so that we can continue to build this technology and deploy it here in the state of Kansas as well as on our borders. Again, I'll show you what this looks like.
Carlin.
When you say tens of millions of dollars coming into Kansas, I'd like to know how. Would you just tell me how that's working? Who's paying us to do this or something?
Sure. So the
Just
Department of Defense just awarded us a $15 million grant to continue developing technology for shallow void detection. And I'll talk a little bit about that and show a little bit more about that. But it comes in the form of a DoD grant in this case. So again, something that I don't think people think of the center of the country and a geological survey doing, but I think it's a really good example. I'll show you another example. So this is on page 4 of your packet. The image on the left-hand side is a drone. That drone is about the size of the space here in between your desks. So it's a large operating drone. It's flying a magnetometer below it. So we've developed methodologies to use magnetotellurics in an airborne setting to fly over grasslands, to fly over their surface. Why? Well, because using this technology and then using the processing from it, we can identify orphaned wells. And we've done exactly that. So this is a great example. The slide in the middle, you can see the bright red splotches in a field of blue. That's an aerial image where you're looking at 5 orphaned wells that we identified in a blind test that the Kansas Corporation set up for us. So they knew where the wells were, we did not. We flew our drone over using magnetotellurics and we were able to identify with precision exactly where those orphaned wells are.
Okay, now I'm going to stop you for a question. What's the mile radius of where these 5 wells were found?
This is, it's not a huge area, and I'm looking for something on scale. I mean, you can see 100 meters on that. So you can see 100 meter scale on the bottom of the map. So that kind of gives you a range. You know, think of this as like a section. The exciting thing, though, is that we can fly this thing. You know, what we do is we go back and forth. We set a precision pattern that thing is going to fly. And so it goes back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and then zeroes in on the signal of these orphaned wells. And just for clarity, these have no surface expression. So this is just grass. But they represent a real hazard to us. And the Kansas Corporation Commission has been doing really extraordinary work to find and plug and abandon these wells. And so we're working with them and are really excited about this program to be able to expand on that. I'm going to give you another example. So now I'm on page 5 of your pack. KU today, by the way, I should say the Kansas Geological Survey is one of the centers, one of the research centers at the University of Kansas. So we're housed at the University of Kansas. Our budget comes almost exclusively, however, from this body. So we get no dollars from the University of Kansas. It all comes from the legislature and then grants that we pull in. So this is KU today, and what we did was we worked with mole companies. We do a lot of work with private industry where we can partner on grants, for example, and research projects. We worked with mole companies on a drilling project where we were able to bring in some heavy tech from outside the state for downhole logging. In particular, we were testing a new type of pulse neutron tool. So it's a high precision geophysics tool that we can use to identify the chemistry of the subsurface remotely, effectively. The log in the middle is just one example of one of our scientists, Jason's work to come up with an integration, in this case, of rare earth element distributions along that well path. And then on the right-hand side, this is the model that Jason came up with effectively for the eastern flank of the state of Kansas, looking in this case at rare earth element and in particular gadolinium concentrations. So the idea here and the impact is we can take new technologies, bring them into the state of Kansas, fund them through private and through grant funding, run that technology, and we can make maps like what you're seeing on the right, which is a pathway towards where do we have concentrations of a highly valued rare earth element. Another example of what we do. This one is my favorite, though. So now I'm on slide 6. And this is from our legislative field conference 2 years ago. And the reason that I love this is the symbology of it. So what you have here, we were out in this case, we were in southwestern Kansas in an oil field. Brexco was very good to allow us to come in and work with them. We gave a tour of the field, we looked at the equipment, we looked at the geology in the area, we brought core out, so we were educating our legislators, fellow legislators, and business people about the geologic relevance. But the cool thing to me is that you've got forgive me, Mr. Chairman. You've got the chairman of the Water Committee. You've got members of the Kansas Water Authority standing in an irrigated crop field that's also an oil field with members of the Kansas Corporation Commission, members of the Kansas Water Authority, and members of Brexco, a relatively large independent oil company, talking about energy and water together. And I would argue that the two are inextricably linked. We can't do energy without water, and we can't do water without energy. And those two things, bar none, are the lifeblood of our state. They're the lifeblood of every municipality. They're the lifeblood of every farmer, every rancher, and every industry, and every town. So to me, this is like the symbol of exactly what we want and what our mission is. So for today's talk, what I hoped to do was talk about our mission and our motto, which is advancing science and serving Kansas. It's those two things. It's not just science, it's science and service together that really is the secret sauce for the Kansas Geological Survey. So I wanted to show you a little bit about the KGS divisions and its programs. I want to focus on more vignettes of local and statewide impact, as well as international and national impact. And then I know that this committee has a particular interest in some of the water program elements. I'll kind of flash through. I know that y'all have had a lot of water integration recently. I want to hit on the resonant points that might be surprising or helpful, but I want to skip over the stuff that maybe is redundant. Okay, so advancing science and serving Kansas. The Kansas Geological Survey effectively has 5 major divisions and programs. They are water resources and health, and that's environmental health and human health. This is on page 8, I think, of your pack. They are geological archives and libraries. Doesn't sound super impactful, but actually the geological archives and the libraries are one of the very most impactful things that we do, and I'll show you why. Literally millions of records that are the foundation of many of our businesses in the state of Kansas. We do work on energy and critical minerals research. I should say that's my background is in energy. I was with ExxonMobil for 16 and a half years before coming to the state of Kansas. So that's kind of my background is energy mega projects. Critical minerals is also incredibly important, though. Critical materials, I should say, is also important. So not just rare earth elements and things of particular value for their poundage, but also things like road aggregate, which is probably, pound for pound, one of the most important and valuable things in the state of Kansas, is just finding good concrete admixtures. We do work in geological hazards and applied geophysics. I gave you a taste of that with the work on void detection. And then applied information technology and geographic information systems. Our work in GIS is competitive with any other in the country, and you could say that we are the finest in the country in what we do and the value that we bring in our GIS programs. Through all of this, the return on investment is understanding of our current situation and understanding of future potential pathways. And then I worked really hard on this animation, so I'm going to see if it works to illustrate the point that it's really the integration of the programs together. All of these divisions work hand in hand with each other so that we can have more impact, greater impact. So for example, our water resources program relies hand in hand on our archives and our libraries information, along with our IT and geographical information systems, in order to develop very sophisticated data storage and management practices, and then to get them out to the public where people can use them. Hazards identification, same thing. It's integrated very much with our work across programs, especially IT. Energy and critical minerals, again, you can see a pattern of connectivity. I'll animate again, and the point that I want to make here is that the other secret sauce with the Kansas Geological Survey that I think is often overlooked, but I think is incredibly important, is that we have unparalleled capabilities in 3 dimensions. One is our field services capability. We have multiple drilling rigs, and we have the ability to go most places in the state and get that one-dimensional core view, log view of what's in the subsurface. We go out and we drill wells all the time, whether they be water or energy or minerals. The next is what I'll call the data ecosystem at the Kansas Geological Survey. It is easy to grab data and post it on a website. It is incredibly difficult to take 160 years of geological information, and we're 160 years old, by the way, so happy birthday us. But 160 years of geological information and coordinate that in a way that is accessible to researchers globally, accessible to businesses, accessible to other state agencies. So that data ecosystem is something that we've been focused on at the Geological Survey, and that manifests in real return on investment for the state of Kansas. The last is the digital infrastructure. The ability, we have a small army of software developers, for example. Those folks do next level work in making sure that we have software not only in the Geological Survey, but also for the Department of Agriculture and Natural Resources, also for the Kansas Water Office, also for multiple different agencies. So we write software, whether it be phone apps, whether it be computer apps, whether it be behind the scenes data acquisition and reporting programs. Kansas Corporation Commission is another good one. So we work with these fellow agencies to make sure that they have the digital infrastructure that they need, again, kind of parried off of what we do at the Geological Survey. I'll reiterate, our mission is, and our specialty and our value is to develop authoritative, up-to-date data. Not just data, but authoritative data that's QA, QC'd, and available. Second there is to translate that into actionable insights, to make sure that you have the information that you need to make the decisions that you need to make. And then the third pillar is all about partnering with communities, partnering with farmers, partnering with teachers, partnering with ranchers and industries to make sure that we are doing everything that we need to do within our mission for economic impact and sustainability at the same time. So that's kind of what we are. I'll go through a couple of slides here relatively quickly just to get on to the cool science and engineering. On slide 12, it's just a little bit of our superlatives. So we have about 160 scientists, about 60 of those folks, 60, I should say, scientists, staff, and engineers and technicians. About 60 are funded by the state of Kansas. All the rest of those, so about double of that, are funded by grants that we bring in. So we develop grants We're able to hire permanent staff, students, as well as temporary staff on those funds. And that's kind of how we, one of the ways that we try to do much more than what we take from the state. Between about 2018 and now, we've brought in approximately $53 million of grant funding into the state of Kansas. That's not including the $15 million DoD grant that's just recent. This is a range of different programs, again, from Department of Energy, National Science Foundation, Department of Defense, et cetera. We do a lot of work to get our science out. Yes, we participate in the peer-reviewed literature. That's kind of the language of the sciences and engineering. We do a tremendous amount of work presenting at international, national, state, and local convenings. And we file reports. So we put out reports that are available and open source. This is a shocking one to most folks. So on average, we facilitate approximately 672,000 industry log and well file downloads per year. So and that's coming from our data resources, that's coming from our online applications. So about 670,000 industry well log and downloads every year, and that goes straight to Kansas Industries. I would argue that we have a GIS data system, a seismic monitoring network to measure earthquakes that rival any in the state, in the nation. So to think that Kansas has a seismic network that rivals that of California or Hawaii or Washington, places that are very seismically active, is really astonishing. Why do we have that? Well, because by having that infill seismic network, we're able to identify earthquakes of much lower magnitude, and we're able to pinpoint exactly where they are on the Earth's surface, as well as at what depth. And that gives us clarity to say, where are earthquakes happening? Why might they be happening? And is there something that we can do about it? And we've done exactly that. So another good example of how we as the state of Kansas can control our own destinies with precision science. We've been in a rebuilding pathway. So the state of Kansas, I should say, for 22 years, our funding was flat in a nominal sense. And so in a real dollar sense, it was down every year. And that really led to a catastrophic decline in our ability to do services and science in the state. In 2023, this body elected to repair that budget. We did it in two funding cycles. So the major funding cycle came in fiscal year 24 and brought us back up. And then we've continued on that plan with a smaller appropriation this year that was set for fiscal year 25. So what that did was that righted the ship. It allowed us to restore some critical positions, and the survey is back to healthy functioning now. And as always, we're developing a host of new technological capabilities, and I'll give you some windows into that now. I want you to keep in mind there is a continuum between service and science, and the thing that I think is so impactful is this continuum. It really works together in a really cool way, and I'll show you exactly how. So, on the left-hand side is service. On the right-hand side is fundamental science, and in the middle is applied science. The Kansas Geological Survey does all three of these, and we go, even in my own research, day in and day out, we slide back and forth between those at all given times. The fundamental contributions to the science are attractive and impactful globally and nationally. The service element and the applied science is really all about the state of Kansas and uplift here. And again, I want you to keep this in mind, and I'll go back to the shallow geophysics as a case point. So as I was saying before, we have gradual or catastrophic risk from to infrastructure and to safety from things like sinkholes. Sinkholes are pretty common here. We have carbonates in our subsurface that dissolve and form holes in the subsurface. We have mines, abandoned mines from generations ago that pose a risk. And then we also have salt in the subsurface across most of the western part of the state, and that salt can dissolve and create a void where collapses can happen. This is what it looks like when bad things happen from sinkholes. So this was a catastrophic sinkhole that happened across a rail trestle. You can imagine what would happen if a train was going across that So what we did was we focused on shallow hazards. And the image on the right is one of two Vibra-sized machines. It's a massive truck. It's a very heavy truck. And what that does is it creates a seismic wave into the shallow subsurface. We go out and we measure that wave and we make seismic images like what you're seeing on the right, or I'm sorry, on the lower left. That seismic image is not that special. The thing that's special is the processing of the data to identify the shallow voids, to identify the hazards, and to identify the stress field around that hazard, and to identify, is that growing? Is that going to stay static? You know, is that something we need to focus on or not? So obviously, the Department of Transportation here in the state of Kansas has been very focused on those questions with our shallow hazards team. As I said before, though, that KGS technology has been very impactful for Department of Homeland Security. This is the same tech now deployed overseas, deployed in Afghanistan, going down the streets of Kabul. That's a KGS vehicle. It's the cage on the front. You can kind of see it on the right-hand side of the soldier there. That cage in the front houses that seismic source. It's a special source receiver pairing that we've developed. So deploying this off of our shores, away from the United States as well. Department of Defense has been fascinated by this, and this is in our garage now, where we're adapting that same technology onto Humvees, so that the DoD, an operator, Army Corps of Engineer soldier, can remain in the Humvee in a safe zone, a relatively safe zone, and operate that source receiver pairing automatically. So the M60 turret, or the 50 cal turret on the top is now full of pneumatics and engineering equipment, but it allows us to operate this vehicle effectively remotely from inside the Humvee itself. Again, this is kind of the tip of the iceberg. Now $15 million new grant. The press release is about to go out about that grant to come into the state to continue developing this tech. So that's a good example of how service turned into fundamental science and now is turning back into applied science. It's, again, going back and forth across that continuum. This is just to illustrate, we do work with all different agencies at the federal level. We do work with dozens and dozens and dozens of companies here in the state of Kansas, all the way from energy to the 911 Council to energy companies, Evergy, Nextera, et cetera, to Ducks Unlimited, working in conservation and water. On the left-hand side, I want to make the point that we do work day in and day out, every single day, with every one of the Kansas agencies in the state of Kansas. So Department of Commerce, Corporation Commission, et cetera, Health and Environment. So we're deeply integrated with all of these institutions and provide the vital data that they need to operate. I'd like to zero in on a couple of examples now of energy and critical materials. And again, this is kind of center of mass for me, so I'll go through it. But so this is our drilling rig. We're one of the only states, if not the only state, survey that is capable of drilling its own observation and core wells. So that in and of itself is a remarkable thing. We're second or third with respect to size of the Kansas Geological Survey, behind Texas. But we're the only one that has the ability to drill its own core. What that has resulted in, that plus donations from industry over many, many decades, is a priceless subsurface collection. Kansas is not well endowed with respect to outcrops that give us a window into the subsurface, but we have 450,000 or more wells, many of which have core. And that core is housed at one of three facilities. So we have an on-site facility in Lawrence at our headquarters. We have an off-site facility. I like to equate it, it's a little bit like the last scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark, where they put the Ark in the massive, it's like that, with just rows and rows and rows. In this case, you're looking at a warehouse that houses approximately 73,000 boxes of core. And it's around 5,500 wells worth of material housed at that North Lawrence facility. Much bigger facility is in Wichita. So our KGS facilities in Wichita house about 151,000 wells worth of cuttings. So that's a record where we take rock chips as we drill through the subsurface. These are mostly industry wells, but those chips come back to the surface and they become a record of that entire well's journey through the subsurface. So an incredibly important collection. We house it down in Wichita with our team there at our Kansas Geological Sample Repository. Pair that then with literally millions of individual well records, and you've got something that's truly extraordinary. So I'm going to animate it here beginning on slide 19. So this is just an image. I just grabbed it at random, looking in near Scott City out in southwest Kansas. This is our oil and gas research exploration portal. So you go on this. A lot of people call it the oil and gas mapper. There are companies who tell us that they spend all day, every day, using this mapper, working with these data. So nothing super special here, just a nice map of around Scott City. But I'm going to animate, and you're going to see what all of the wells look like. So this is a record of abandoned wells, active wells, cored wells, wells that had oil discoveries or gas discoveries, wells that were dry holes. So this is the industry's record in that area. The contours on this are an interpretation that KGS scientists have made. In this case, it's a geologic map of the top of the Mississippian reservoir, the oil and gas reservoir there in that area. So it's a reservoir map. The contours, I'm going to flip it again, and now I've gone much deeper. Now I'm looking at a geologic map that we made. It's a structure map of the deep waste disposal unit. Okay, so this is the Arbuckle unit where we dispose of wastewater throughout the state of Kansas. So it's extraordinary to me that we're able to make these maps and get them integrated with the oil and gas record itself relative to wells. So that's what this represents. Pair on top of that then very high resolution ortho imagery from our GIS department. And so again, this is work that our GIS department does to curate, to make sure that we have funding for these types of surveys. This is not Google Earth, this is not Google Maps, this is far higher resolution data, but it allows you to zoom in and identify individual land parcels. I'll tell you a tax story in a minute, but this becomes, again, an incredibly important, powerful data set with respect to setting tax boundaries and executing 911 procedures across the state of Kansas in a seamless way. I'm going to go back to energy and geology. This is new. So this is on slide 23. And what we're looking at here is an analysis of the Arbuckle Formation's CO2 storage capability. Okay, so what you're looking at, the team, the subsurface dynamics team here, I kind of look at it from the bottom maps on the lower left and kind of move my way up, which is the resulting map. But what you're looking at is a chance of success of storing CO2 in the subsurface in every county of the state of Kansas. And this is a new analysis that we've done. We're looking at what's the phase of the CO2 that's going to go into that depth. What's the seal? What's the leakage? What's the probability that we're going to be able to keep that CO2 in the subsurface? What's the reservoir presence? Do we have Arbuckle there? If so, is it good reservoir or is it lousy reservoir for storing CO2? The resulting map on the upper deck here is every county in the state of Kansas with a relative chance of success of being able to store CO2 there. The graph on the right-hand side identifies every county with its depth below surface and then the storage capacity in gigatons of CO2. Now, this is a blunt instrument. It's a broad analysis to do to the entire state of Kansas, and it has to be paired with pinpoint accuracy work on any given parcel. That's part of the Class 6 well application process. But this is a phenomenal starting place for us to begin to funnel down where do we want to go and do this? Where does it make sense to do this? And then pair it with, for example, methanol industry locations. The result on this is that we can store a lot of CO2 in our subsurface in the state of Kansas if we want to. The counties in blue are going to have low chance of success. The counties that are circled there in red might have the best chances of success. So again, it gives us something to shoot toward. We'll talk a little bit about hydrogen, which is something that I've been spending a lot of my time worrying about, and if I'm turning gray, this is why. Airbus has just announced that they're going to be demonstrating their hydrogen-fueled Airbus A380 next year in the 2026 timeframe. That'll be hydrogen combustion. There's also hydrogen fuel cells, lots of different things. This is just to demonstrate hydrogen is a thing. It is absolutely a thing, and it is something that continues to come back to the state of Kansas, and I'll relay to you why. Okay, I'm on slide 25. The graphic that you're looking at on the lower left is something that I drew, and I call it the hydrogen Swiss Army knife. What it's doing is on the left-hand side, it's showing you pathways to produce hydrogen. In the middle, it's talking about hydrogen storage, which is a special story in the state of Kansas as well. And then on the right-hand side, it's state-specific, it's Kansas-specific utilization pathways that we think are going to be coming to us. So things like aviation fuels, fuels for electrical generation, fuel cells for industries as well as for vehicles. I'll skip down and I'll go to ammonia fertilizer. You know, right now we import most of our ammonia fertilizer. We can become an exporter of ammonia fertilizer if we produce hydrogen here at the scale that we want to, or that we can. On the upper part, the language there, so I led a coalition called Harvest Hydrogen. This started as a grant opportunity from the Department of Energy. And ultimately, we went to the bitter end of an extremely aggressive fight nationally for part of $7.5 billion of federal funding for the development of hydrogen hubs. For our proposal, it would have been roughly $900 million. We went through many rounds of grant application process with the Department of Energy, including 7 hours of testimony in Washington with a team of 20 people from the state of Kansas who went, including Department of Commerce. And we were at the feather edge of receiving that $1 billion, which would have been part of a $4.2 billion total project, and that's national investment and private investment in the project. We were named an alternate for that funding for a couple of different reasons, but they loved the proposal, they loved the concept, and it's something that I think is going to continue to be important in the state of Kansas. The other thing that has been surprising has been the focus from the Department of Defense, from the Department of Energy, from the USGS in natural hydrogen. Okay, so this is hydrogen that we wouldn't make synthetically at the surface, but this is hydrogen that would be developed in the subsurface one of two ways, either by identifying reservoirs full of hydrogen, either gas or dissolved in water, or more likely, the development of horizontal wells into deep rocks, and then the stimulation of those wells with hot water and catalysts to produce hydrogen from the chemically reactive deep rocks. Kansas, a little bit of Nebraska, and a little bit of Iowa, our geology is unique in the country in that it brings the right kind of rocks close to the surface, about 2,000 feet rather than 8,000 feet. And so that improves our economic ability to go and get that resource. The thing that you're looking on the right is a brand new model that we've just been testing and developing. This is kind of a unicorn globally. This is not being done very far and wide. Numerical modeling of hydrogen production in deep crustal rocks is pretty exciting stuff, and it's built here at the KGS. So we're working it. We're trying to decide and figure out, is this a thing? If so, what's it going to look like? At the same time, we've got companies from all around the globe here doing intents to drill, filing intents to drill to come and drill, and in fact, they are drilling exploratory wells. So is this going to be a new thing? Is this going to be a new oil boom in the state of Kansas? It's too early to tell. I don't know. But it is a resource that we're actively investigating and trying to bring information back to this body. Salt. I'm on slide 27. This is a map that I made so it's a map on the left, shows the state of Kansas. The blue field here is our bedded salt resource, okay? So what this is showing is the thickness of the bedded salt resource in central Kansas, where it's pretty well known, and then out in western Kansas, where it's less well known. Why salt? Who cares? Salt in the Hutchinson area is used right now to store liquid hydrocarbon. It was used to store gaseous hydrocarbon, and it's used to store lots and lots of different kinds of waste products. But when you bury that salt deeper and deeper in the subsurface, it becomes, what you can do is you can solution mine out a cavern in that salt. It becomes an almost perfect medium to store hydrogen, okay? And so as the hydrogen economy starts to take off, and as we start to see the need to balance supply and demand of that commodity, the state of Kansas comes into focus because it's got nearly unlimited capacity, in theory, to store hydrogen, okay? So that could become something that becomes important for the economies of the western part of our state. And so we're actively investigating what is the storage potential, what are the engineering problems associated with the storage potential, what would the distribution look like, so that property owners can make a decision if that's something that they want to do. Keep moving along here, and I'm keeping my time here to try to not go too far over. This is a geologic map of Miami County. It is an award-winning map. We won an award at the Esri conference and an international conference a couple of years ago. This represents the familiar. Most people are used to geologists walking around and mapping the surface of the earth. The reason that we make these maps at the county scale is that, well, one reason is that they're incredibly important for the mineral aggregates folks. So they're not only important for our water resources, but they're also important for our energy resources, as well as just building effective road aggregates. So this is familiar. But as I move forward here, I want to make the point that that superficial geologic map is just the tip of the iceberg. And the real view that we at the KGS take is this ecosystem where everything from above the earth to at the earth's surface to all the way down through the basement rock, that's our goal. And our goal is that you have seamless integration of the rock types, the fluid types, the energy resources types, the mineral resources types, all the way from what's right below your foot, all the way down to the known parts of the crust. We do this largely through geographical information systems and through information technology integration. And I just want to make a couple of quick points, again, that I think are really surprising to many. I'm on slide 31. So our Data Access and Support Center is one of the divisions of the Kansas Geological Survey. It provides agencies and businesses access to the best possible geospatial data available. So this is things like LIDAR, laser interferometry. It's things like aerial imagery. And there are many, many applications of this. One that's surprising is 911 services. So the KGS facilitates statewide 1-foot pixel resolution data throughout the state of Kansas. The reason this is important, and the reason that this is important to keep modern, so our latest survey is actually coming here in 2024, is so that we have seamless coverage of 911 services, no matter if you're in Kansas City or if you're in liberal Kansas or anywhere in between. We have to have a goal of seamless coverage where we have accurate addresses, accurate roads, accurate gates, accurate understanding of fire hydrants, accurate understanding of utilities, pipeline as well as energy utilities. So all of this is very GIS data centric, and we do the finest job in the country in providing that. I was talking to our division lead for GIS the other day, and he was saying, full stop, Kansas has the finest 911 system in the country, and largely because of the geographical information systems that we organize at our survey. The other one that is tremendously important is actually Department of Revenue. The map on the lower right is the state of Kansas, and it's every tax appraisal district in the state. And that those tax appraisal districts, having those boundaries accurate are incredibly important from at the county level, the township level, at the state level. And all of those data are facilitated, generated and facilitated by the Kansas Geological Survey. I'll keep moving into water resources, and the way that I want to do it here starts on page 33, I think, in your packet. So it starts, and it's a graphic that's going to look like this. I know that this is especially busy. I drew this in order to illustrate the point, a couple of points, I guess I'll say, about our water programs. Many are familiar with our groundwater availability, High Plains Aquifer, for example, the work that we do on the High Plains Aquifer. So we do groundwater availability. Many are familiar now that we're doing a statewide groundwater quality program. And so we've been able to partner with the Kansas Water Office, Kansas Department of Health and Environment, and the Kansas Farm Bureau to develop a Kansas water quality program. So we've been standing that program up. But a lot of times it's hard to describe all of the programs and how the programs work together. I'll bring up the idea of critical zone science and critical zone analysis. So it's not just what's in our groundwater, and it's not just what's at our surface water, but it's everything that happens in between too. How does a water molecule move from the surface of the earth down? How quickly does it do that? Does it pick up contaminants as it goes? Does it bring contaminants with it? And how does water move around in that zone? So that's essentially what critical zone science is. Another one that's incredibly important and incredibly impactful from a cost perspective and a value perspective, ROI, is actually stream bank erosion and sediment load. So as you know, we have a number of reservoirs around the state of Kansas. They're vital for our water supply, our clean water supply. Reservoirs do one thing really, really well. They fill up with sediment. That's what they naturally do. All lakes want to fill up with sediment over time, including the ones that we engineer. So we need to reduce that sediment load because once the sediment gets into those reservoirs, it's extremely costly to clean up. So what can we do as geologists and engineers to help with that problem? And I'll give you a really interesting example, I think, in what that looks like. So all of those programs, those four programs, help with decision support. They help with clear impacts from each one of those divisions. But as scientists, we have an opportunity to integrate. We integrate through simulation, we integrate through modeling, both at the reservoir operations scale as well as the fluid flow scale, transport of fluids around the state of Kansas, mostly in the subsurface. And all of that feeds into that data ecosystem. And then ultimately, the ultimate challenge is really truly understanding uncertainty and risk and putting that in front of decision makers. And so all of those programs ultimately funnel down into scenario development and analysis. And that's really the gold standard. That's where we have to be for long-term policy change, for long-term policy education. I'm going to pull just a couple of examples, and I know that you're very familiar with these data, so I want to go quickly through this if it's all right. This is the water level measurement program. I think many are familiar with this. It's around 1,400 wells annually that we measure. What nearly knocked me out when I read the data from my team was this year, in this year's campaign, the KGS alone measured 97,500 feet of well by hand. So that's engineers and geologists and technicians out there reeling a steel cable down each well and then reeling it back up to get a measurement of the water level in that. The other thing that was surprising to me was that the total miles traveled once we got west of Oakley was 11,600 miles, road miles, and we did it in about a week and a half, and the average temperature was about 10 degrees Fahrenheit. We do these surveys when we're not irrigating, so we do them in the deep winter so that we get a more accurate reading on what the subsurface is doing. It's a sophisticated process. It's map and digital application enabled. These are the results, and I think most are familiar with the results. So, it was an especially dry year. We've had a protracted dry period. I do want to make the point, though, that in most places in the High Plains Aquifer, it's a misconception that if we reduce pumping, that the aquifer is going to go up. In most places, it's a much longer time frame for a drop of water to make it from the surface down through all these layers into the aquifer itself. So we need to keep in mind that what we're talking about is changing the glide slope on how fast we're reducing the water table. There are ways to do this in a sustainable way. Most of the water, though, moves laterally into the aquifer. It's effectively coming from Colorado, from the Rockies, and moving its way laterally through the system. There are good things and bad things about that. The good thing is that the water that's below your feet is largely your water. So if you're a water rights owner, that water is yours, and the sustainability measures that you take to manage that water are going to affect you, not just your neighbors, not just the region. I'll move along. We provide context, slide 37. Slide 38 is back to that percentage change. And the thing that I want to point out here is that subsurface calibration is the secret sauce in understanding our water future. This is a hydrograph from a well that is continuously monitored. So it's monitored every single day, multiple times a day. And then we get a data feed from that well. And it tells us what day-to-day, season-to-season, what that well's doing and how it's recovering over time. That allows us to calibrate the measurements that we take by hand every year around that 1,500 or so wells. I'm going to skip a slide, and I want to move into more about that calibration. I also want to make a point here on slide 40. So we developed, in order to understand how much water we were using, Division of Water Resources had a card, and so irrigators would go out, anyone with an industrial scale well would go out and fill out that card and say, okay, how much did I pump? What did that look like? And so it took months and months and months for those data to come back to the DWR and to be usable. Well, we developed a program, an application where individual farmers can use their phone and can use a computer tablet to go in and fill that in. So now the data come back effectively instantaneously back to the Division of Water Resources. The impact of that is we know how much water we're using and where we're using it. When you combine that then with how much the water table is declining, now you've got a tool that almost no other state has in the country. And this is what's so exciting. I'm on slide 41. So the graph here is total irrigation water use on the lower, on the x-axis. And then it's the annual water level on the y-axis. Okay, so you're seeing a plot with a really good data regression of how much water are we using and then what's the water table doing. What I'll point out is that there is, and I'll use the pointer, it may work. No, it's not gonna work. There's a zero level. It's about 1/3 of the way down on that graph is 0 feet change in the water table. Okay, so that is stable for that postage stamp area on the water table map. Okay, everything below that on that y-axis is water table drop. And so what you're seeing is that there are, in this particular parcel of land, you've got mostly water table drop, but it varies year to year depending on how much we're pumping. But I'm going to illustrate what's so powerful about these data, water level and water use together. So we can identify what is the locus of the data, like where are we using, how much water are we using, and what does that equate to in water table change? And then we can plot it on this map, on this graph rather. And so what you see is that here we're using let's see, what is this? This is about 0.4 million acre feet per year. And that's equating to about a 1/2 foot drop in the water table. But with data like these, we can also identify what would 0 water table change look like and how much pumping would that allow, okay? And so I'm going to illustrate that on this graph. So this is what 0 water table change means, and this is what the water utilization is. And here's the impactful thing. The result here in this particular parcel of land, and it's going to change laterally, it changes varying based on the geology, is you don't have to stop pumping. You have to reduce by about 17.5%, and you're going to achieve stability for this aquifer in this region. That becomes a really powerful tool for irrigators, for ranchers, for farmers, for municipalities. It also becomes a powerful tool for industries that want to come in, because we can say, look, you can utilize the feedstock water that you need for your process, but you need to take into account your Q stable number and make sure that you're keeping that percentage of water in the ground forever. In doing so, you can achieve sustainability while also having the water that you need for your process. So to me, this is one of the most impactful products that we can produce, because it gives people, it gives our businesses and our irrigators a chance and an interest to be able to manage their own water future. Another super cool application is airborne electromagnetics. I just want to point out, so this is on slide 44. This is a A-Star helicopter landing in the middle of its, or actually it's taking off with this large geophysical array. What they're doing is they're going to go and do flight lines over, in this case, this was in GMD4, this was last year. So we paid for, in partnership with the Water Office through the State Water Plan Fund, we paid for reconnaissance work of GMD4, where we're doing airborne electromag surveying. And this is a carefully choreographed and carefully planned acquisition. It happens over about a month of time in the summer. And what we're doing is we're creating a geophysical image of the lithologies, of the resistivity in the subsurface. And this is the resulting map. This is just one cross section. But what it allows us to do is say, okay, now this is the Ogallala Aquifer here. So the image, the cross section, you have changes in resistivity. Those equate to changes in the rock type itself, which has everything to do with how does water move through the subsurface? How quickly, how effectively does water move through the subsurface? It also tells you in high granularity, how thick is the aquifer? Where is it deeper? Where is it shallower? And so this becomes really an incredible new leap for us in our ability to map in 3 dimensions the High Plains Aquifer. It's a giant leap. Nebraska's doing this work. This was our first survey. We're now getting ready to execute our second survey. It'll be over GMD1 here in 2025. And then our plan is to move across GMD3, which is the most complicated. It's the deepest, thickest High Plains Aquifer. It's more complicated than GMD1 or GMD4. So we're going to be doing that last in 2026 and 2027. This takes an incredible amount of community engagement, as you can imagine, working with the GMDs, working with local farmers, working with stakeholders. But we've had an overwhelmingly positive response, lots of community engagement, lots of great questions, so that we can go out and do this safely and transparently. But it's providing really game-changing data. I'm gonna move through. I want to say one quick thing about stream bank sedimentation. Water quality is an issue in the state of Kansas. We have places like the western flank of the state, right on the Colorado border in Lakin and going through to Garden City, where we have really terrible contamination. This is natural contamination from uranium and chlorides and sulfates. And it's because of a change in our hydrology itself. It's the change in the hydrology of the Arkansas River. It took me a lot of time, by the way, to learn to say Arkansas River, but they trained me well when I came to the state of Kansas. But we have uranium contamination, we have sulfate contamination, and that is a problem. So our work allowed us to identify those issues. Water quality is a concern, but it's also an opportunity. The statewide water quality plan, the water quality program, again, it's multiple agencies. The Kansas Farm Bureau has been a great partner. Kansas Department of Health and Environment has been a partner. We're preparing to partner with Kansas State University as well as Fort Hays State University on this program. It's going to take all of us coming together to sample, to get the water samples, to really truly, and then go and do the analysis across a range of different chemical tracers to understand our water quality in the state. Happy to answer questions about that in just a moment. The last thing I want to say on water is really about stream bank stabilization. We know that stabilization projects, and this is on slide 60 now. I know I'm going quite quickly through. This is work of Tony Lazell, one of our scientists. And he's been doing work on the geology and engineering of stream bank stabilization programs. So this is, think of a meandering river Those meandering streams, by their nature, will erode sediment into the streams. That sediment ultimately makes it into our reservoirs and fills those reservoirs up. And so the question is, what can we do to stabilize those stream banks and reduce the erosion rate? Do these stabilization projects have an impact, a positive impact? The answer is yes, they do, and it's complicated. So the maps that he's showing here on the right-hand side show where we have stabilization projects. They absolutely reduce the amount of sediment that's going into the river, but they also change the hydrography, the physics of the river flow itself. And so one question that we need to be careful of and thoughtful about is, if I do a stabilization project here, what happens downstream? Does that have an impact? What is the impact on sediment load? So that's a question that Tony's asking. But a really exciting potential application here is much larger. It's at the watershed scale. And that is using tracers, chemical tracers, things like radionuclides from nuclear testing in the 50s. We can trace those in the sediment load that ends up in our reservoirs when we go and we core those. And we can actually trace back specific tracers, in this case we're using 30 chemical tracers, back to, effectively, is the sediment source coming from the stream banks? Is it coming from the grasslands? Or is it coming from croplands? So we kind of have those three simple buckets. The exciting thing for us is that we know that reservoirs are going to behave differently depending on their geography, their hydrography. And so we can, and what we're hoping to do is expand these studies and be able to actually create boutique engineering plans for whole watersheds. So Tuttle Creek might be different from Perry Lake, might be different from Clinton, but we can, in theory at least, with this scientific work, go in and make better decisions about where and how do we stabilize stream banks? Is that going to have the best, where can we get the biggest bang for our buck? So pretty exciting, could have a massive return on investment. And I'll be talking with the Corps of Engineers in Champaign, Illinois next month about that program. I want to close with just two slides and a pretty picture of the Niobrara Formation, which is Cretaceous out in western Kansas. You know, for 160 years, the Geological Survey has been amassing information about energy, water, hazards, critical minerals in our state. That mission has stayed the same over that time. The areas of impact, of course, changes over time. We have some of the finest scholars, bar none, in the world. We're able to amass here in Kansas to do this work because of what the Kansas Geological Survey is. We have unparalleled capabilities in things like water resources, shallow geophysics, and geospatial information. We have a long tradition in energy resources, as well as stratigraphy and materials that really are comparable compared to by none. You know, ultimately, we have to do sophisticated data management to deal with the terabytes of data that we have to make that sensible and recognizable and usable. The graphic here in the lower part of this, the right hand of this is what I'll close on, and it's that, you know, our business is doing the measurement, doing the analysis, doing the assessment, and even participating in the planning, understanding uncertainties, risks, and opportunities where they exist, so that then decision makers can go and make decisions and implement. And then round and round we go. It goes back into measurement. How are we doing? So that's effectively what we do, and I'm happy to take any questions from the committee.
Thank you very much. Questions, Representative Roth.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks for your extensive presentation. I've got a couple questions. One was on the map of wells. And so I noticed two blue dots around the Dodge City area. Now, do the blue dots represent multiple wells or just individual wells?
I am going to, if it's okay, I'll grab my presentation. I want to make sure that I'm tracking exactly with you. So you're looking, can you tell me which page you're looking at?
Well, I had been looking at it. I put it up. So, okay, it's not too far in. You had a map of wells, and
Was it something like this, Representative Roth? Was it one of these, or was it the magnetics?
it was the one with the blue dots representing how many wells, like you had, and there was some data with it with a lot of wells over the span of Kansas here. Well, and I'd expect you to know, if you've got a dot representing, is it represent, with all the wells that you've got, probably more than one well. And why I'm asking that is, at Fort Dodge, which is 3 miles east of Dodge City, we had 4 wells when I was managing the soldiers' home. So I was wondering if those wells were included in your survey. With the number of wells that I saw that you said you had, I'm expecting that it was.
I believe so, and I know that our team has developed ways to aggregate where there are clusters of wells that are tightly clustered that you wouldn't be able to represent at a large scale. They do have a nomenclature and a symbology for that, so that then you can zoom way down to the parcel level, and you could see on that lease exactly how many wells and where. I'm not sure if that was the blue symbology on the map that you were seeing there, but I'm happy to try to answer that for you.
That's fine. I was just asking because there was kind of some problems with those wells servicing Fort Dodge that had the high nitrate levels.
Yes.
And so when I was there, I was always concerned with that and actually wanting to get on the city water system at Dodge City just to protect the veterans that we served. Yeah, on page 36.
Oh, okay.
Thank you very much.
Now I'm tracking with you.
Oh,
It was the aquifer map. Now I'm tracking with you. Let me go and try to answer that question.
and so I was just looking at the blue dots on that map and noticed that it appears there's 2 or 3 right at the Dodge City area. And I just figured that there was more than one well per dot.
I think it may be those data. I think the symbology here is that the green wells are measurement wells. The blue, they're little blue dots or blue squares. Those are wells in this case that they did not load the data for one particular reason. This was a preliminary map. One of the things that we try to do is we try to go out and QA/QC real time, and then we go out and we do repeat measurements. If something looks weird on the data themselves, we go out and try to repeat those measurements so that on the final map that it's QA/QC data.
Madam Chair, one more. Yes. So one other question on page 60. It showed the work that you did to the stream bank, and so is there any impact to the environment with the removal of the habitat on the stream bank?
I think essentially they try to reduce any kind of impact on the habitat. What I would say is, keep in mind that stream bank is eroding catastrophically anyway. So you're going to have some grasses that gather there, that grow there, but when you look at sort of the stream bank, it's labeled B in the figure. That's something that's being eaten away pretty quickly, and it's being eaten away during storm events. And so, I think when they go in and the Corps or local construction firms go and do this work, they try to minimize habitat impact, but they also don't look at that as necessarily habitat anyway.
Okay, thank you.
That's the best of my knowledge, at least.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any other questions from the committee? Representative White.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Doctor. This is a great presentation. There was, I don't know what pages, there was a picture of some sinkholes, and then 20-some pages later, there was pictures of salt caverns.
Yes.
Are there correlations between those two?
There can be, and boy, I wish I had brought a picture of my whiteboard at my office right now, where Dr. Miller, who runs this really truly extraordinary program, he was the head of the president of the Society for Exploration Geophysics, so he's an internationally recognized scholar. He was drawing on my whiteboard a new program where we do a lot of work in the cavern fields near Hutch. And the short answer is yes, there is potential for collapse. And what they do is they try to identify when is that collapse likely to happen in an abandoned old salt cavern, right? So the trick there is to fill that cavern and to understand, when do I need to fill this? Do I need to fill this? Is there a real risk? So it's a risk hazard assessment. Rick Miller is developing right now algorithms with his team. It's machine learning based, but to identify the very specific seismic signal that happens when you get something like a little bit of the roof caving in, which happens, but a little bit of that rock material sloughing off and impacting the bottom in, let's say, an abandoned water-filled cavern. That has one signature. What does it look like when it's a lateral disturbance, so like an earthquake, a small earthquake? They happen all the time. What is that signal? Can you deconvolve? There is a risk, and the individual salt producers, cavern operators, they closely manage those caverns. They go in, they do sonar surveys every year or two. They do this in partnership with Kansas Department of Health and Environment. When you go further west, that hazard diminishes significantly because you're much deeper. You're thousands of feet below the surface rather than a few hundred feet below the surface. So as we go farther out towards western Kansas, towards Garden and Scott City, you still have substantial resources, but they're buried, and that actually helps you from a sinkhole risk perspective substantially. The caverns themselves, the other thing to remember is they're kept spatially. They're kept at a small dimension, so about 100 foot by about 200 feet, closely monitored. And caverns of today are not caverns of 20 years ago or 30 years ago, so they're closely monitored and yeah, so it's part of our business. It's something that we do hazard assessments on, but it's a manageable risk.
Thank you for that answer, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Long.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for being here. Out in my area, we've seen oil and gas companies since the 60s bring out equipment on trucks that does the testing. I don't know if what it's doing, if it's magnetic or if it's vibration. And I see you're doing that, and I see them accessing your data. Have they shared with you anything they've done for the past 50 years, or is it just a one-way share back to them with your stuff?
Sure. And I think what we're talking about is largely seismic data, largely their seismic acquisition. It's a mixed bag. So we have close relationships with the oil and gas community. We work carefully with them. And some operators have absolutely shared back seismic data. They keep that as proprietary. They're spec surveys. They pay a bunch of money for them, and so they keep them, largely keep those surveys. There's not a reporting requirement in the state of Kansas like there would be in potentially other states or in Canada where, okay, you get to keep it for proprietary behind a firewall for 2 years, but then you're going to report it out. To my knowledge, there's nothing like that. However, that partnership with those companies has been really extraordinary, and I'll give one example. One of my jobs is to be a professor, and so I also have oil and gas students. And one of the things that we try to do for our energy students is practical exercises. And so, we've had really great success. We're working with oil operators in the past where they'll give us data sets to use where our students can use them. We can manipulate them and work with them. And then they get some interpretation. We get the ability to use an industry data set of real importance. And whether or not we turn that into a report with de-identified information or give it back to the oil company and thank them for the opportunity. What I will say, though, is that we do see lots of opportunities, and in fact, we execute those to do things like, all right, we're going to partner with, a couple of companies. We're going to go and work actively together to go and get federal funding back into the state, like a DOE grant. When we do that, then we're generating well data and seismic data that absolutely goes into the public record. And so that becomes something that everybody can use.
Also, being back at the county level, I'm going with, in regards to 911, boundaries change, gates change, streets, roads, everything changes. So most counties update their GIS mapping. We did it every 2 or 3 years, and we paid for a whole new GIS. Is that shared back to your database then?
It absolutely is.
Okay.
And what I would say is, and the real expert is my colleague Ken Nelson, who's our associate director for GIS, and that's, you know, he could fill a day with unbelievable information about this. But I would suggest that we need to start thinking of our geographical data. You know, we all share the same geography, right? So duplicative use of information just like that of, you know, all right, we're going to have land imagery, we're going to have leaf-off imagery, we're going to have LiDAR imagery. Those data have this compounding effect with their utilization. They have this massive return on investment. It's something like 20 to 1, $20 to 1 on return because everybody uses it. Energy companies, utilities, tax appraisal districts, water, et cetera. So GIS data is a real advantage for the state of Kansas, and we don't tell those stories enough, but it's really important. So thank you for asking the question.
Any other questions? Representative White.
For the second time. To bounce off my representative from Ulysses's question, aren't those well logs in that interactive map that we looked at?
They are.
So there's a lot of shared information, if you will. But my question is,
yes.
okay, my question is, how do we better measure plumes? We talked about that in the water committee, and we just need more data, correct?
Representative White, you're exactly right. So first, I'll say a clarifying remark. The vast majority, in fact, if not all, of well data do come back through the Kansas Corporation Commission and then into the Geological Survey. So I should say that the well data, we have an unbelievable record, and that's because of that partnership with industry. Seismic data are treated very differently, but the well data do come back. Water quality. And I know I went very quickly through water quality. You have lots of information in your packet here that I hope you'll go back to. The only way that we understand what's going on with those subsurface plumes is really kind of two things. We have to have a record of ambient water quality. So it's not just what's happening today, but what happened 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, so that we can see change. So that change, that delta, that dynamism in the system is important. The second one is that we have to have a network, and then we have to have within that sampling network, we have to have the ability to move into specific sectors and do a more specific regional analysis. So if we do see a hot spot for nitrates, we then need to zoom in on that area and have a little bit more specific locational information. And that's exactly what the team is doing. So we've got this array of heavy metals, pesticides, herbicides, chemicals like nitrates, et cetera, that we're sampling for now. It's taken a long time to build that analytical capability. It's taken about a year to build that analytical capability. We have it now. PFAS is another one that's a real challenge. But then it's the aerial distribution of the sampling itself that becomes the important thing. And so the way that we're doing this is, all right, we're going to have 300 sites. We have 300 sites. That creates a benchmark for us. Those are wells that we go back to over and over and over again. Why 300? Because those are the same sites that we had 22 years ago when the KDHE had to close down its groundwater monitoring program. So we're going back to those same sites. And then we infill potentially with thousands of more wells so that we have a much higher resolution picture of water quality. Think of it like this. We have a very high resolution picture of our water table change. We want to do exactly the same thing with water quality. The only way to do it is partnerships. I mean, it's when you measure a water level, that's a discrete single measurement. But when you go and you measure water quality, you're talking about dozens of different chemical analytes that all have their own boutique methods to measure. So it's more expensive, it's more difficult, but it's highly necessary.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any other questions? I have some. What does QA and QC mean?
I'm so sorry. Quality assurance and quality control.
Okay,
You got it.
yeah.
And that's the name of the game. It's anybody can put data out, but putting out authoritative data is a whole different deal. And that's really the important thing.
Okay, I snapped a couple pictures and sent them to my son-in-law out in western Kansas while you were presenting. And he said that he inputs all their online water reports on the computer. And so then I asked him if he knew what his aquifer number was. Is that program in place and functioning? Because he wasn't sure about that.
Think of, I made a bad joke, and I'll try it one more time because it hasn't done well, but I'm going to keep trying. Like, you know, the sleep number bed thing, everybody knows their sleep number. So I have this imagination that everybody someday will know their aquifer number, right? And it would be their Q stable number. It's that graph that I showed of water use versus water table change. That is a different number, parcel to parcel to parcel. And it's because of the change in the hydrology itself. It's because of the change in the aquifer lithologies. And so when I say sort of your aquifer number, that's kind of where I'm going is, does each irrigator kind of know what their Q stable number is? Do they know regionally, and then do they know at the specific farm level?
Okay, so if they've got like 25 pivots over a 20-mile radius, would there be like one number for that or different areas?
Over that kind of distance, you'd have multiple numbers.
Okay, and you said it was water use versus what?
It's water use versus water table. So what's the water table change, or we call it water level change, versus how much are you using? And that relationship is really the key thing. And I should make the point, that's a model. It's a relatively simple model. It's very accessible and very usable. But my hydrologist friends who really know this stuff would be quick to say, that's also the model for, the sort of 10 to 20 year time frame. And because of some of the feedbacks in the system, the Q stable number does change over the decadal timescale. It changes over time for a number of reasons. Where we need to go as a state of Kansas is to actually have numerical models, so computer models of all of our aquifers, so that we can actually simulate the impacts of, all right, what happens if precipitation changes? What happens if pumping goes down in granular detail? What happens if we put in a new factory here? How does that actually impact the rest of the water rights users around? We can actually basically use a model like that to ask questions and test questions and different potential future outcomes. And so this is what we do in the oil and gas community all the time when we're going in to make a large investment decision, a $15 billion decision. We develop the numerical models to tell us exactly what that reservoir is going to do in different pumping scenarios. I would argue we have to do the same thing here for the Ogallala Aquifer.
Okay, thank you. And then we heard in a meeting that I don't remember the date, but when we were talking about stream bank stabilization, it was the dredging day, the dredging and hydrosuctioning day, that the investments in stream bank stabilizations don't yield the result as far as helping clean out a reservoir than the dredging and the hydrosuction investments. That those two, basically, you get more bang for your invested dollar. And that's what we were told that day. That, I mean, I think stream bank stabilization upstream from a reservoir is wonderful, but we were told that, that investment doesn't necessarily help as much as something actually in the reservoir.
I'll claim ignorance on the comparative cost analysis. I just simply don't know the answer to the question specifically. What I would say is we know from our data, from the work that Tony's been doing with others, many others, we know that stabilization projects have an effect. We know that the stabilization project has an impact in stabilizing that section of the stream. And we know that sediment that's not going to come down into the stream is stuff that's not making it into the reservoir. So those are facts. As far as the ROI of doing the stabilization versus dredging it once it gets there, I don't know the economics of that.
Thank you. And one last question. With all the work around conservation and water and everything, why is the Kansas Geological Survey at KU? Why isn't it at K-State?
Wow. I feel like I'm not prepared to answer that question. No, in all seriousness, the survey has been, actually, so my predecessor, Benjamin Mudge, was the first state geologist, and his picture is here in the State House. So he was a Free Stater who came, and he actually ended up living in Manhattan. I'm also going to say, I went to Purdue, so I have no dog in this fight whatsoever. What I will say is that we have close relationships with all the Regents universities. We work super closely with K-State, and, Susan and I, especially in water, but across a range of different energy projects, et cetera. It's a really exciting relationship at all different levels of the university. The KGS benefits tremendously from the relationship and that symbiosis with the university. Things like grant administration, it simply would be impossible for us to do on our own, and that's a big part of what we do. Beyond that, especially coming into March Madness, I'm going to ask to plead the fifth.
Representative Minix, I'll give you the floor for a minute. Do you want to use the microphone, please?
Dr. J, when did the Ogallala Aquifer become filled with water, a rough time frame?
Thanks for that. I didn't prepare. Ogallala, yeah, tens of thousands of years ago, hundreds of thousands of years ago.
Okay. Right now, as he illustrated earlier, there's places where 60% of it's gone, and it doesn't move very fast. And to be honest, we have just been mining that maybe 100 years. There was some very limited irrigation out west in the 1920s. The vast majority of it was in the 1960s. And the over-appropriation that happened in the 60s, 70s, and 80s was because of the policy that came from this building. We have the opportunity to take the science and everything, all the information that's given to us, and change our policy. And that's why the bills over the last several years and all the science in the world does not make much difference if we don't fund and change the way we're doing things currently. If you've lost 60% in 100 years of something that happened 70,000 years ago, we need to change our behavior somewhat, and that's what I was trying to illustrate. Thank you, Madam Chairman, for allowing me. Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you. Representative Carlin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chairman asked about the stream bank stabilization, and I've, from another conservation group I work with a lot, and my brother was a part of, have approached the state for years about doing that, and it's not been met with success. We haven't been able to fund it because others don't believe in that. And as a city commissioner, we did some stream bank stabilization just on our creeks that were flooding, and the backyards were disappearing for people. Some people lost, like 20 feet of their backyard. And so those projects, I've seen them work on a small scale, not anything like a river, I don't know, not like 3 miles of a river or anything. So what is the reluctance from that you meet with on supporting stream bank stabilization?
I have to say I'm not a subject matter expert in this particular field, so I'm not that knowledgeable about this. But I think projects, they're costly. I think projects, there is this idea of, right, if we change something here, what's going on upstream, downstream from that? I think there's also a question, and part of the driver of the science that we're working on is just, can we quantify how effective it really is? Can we quantify, okay, how long is this project going to last, and exactly why from a hydrologic perspective? When do you have to come back in and put new riprap and other things like that in to repair the mitigated site? So I think there hasn't been that much scientific work on the stream bank stabilization itself. Our goal is to go in objectively and simply say, for the hydrography that we're seeing, for the stream morphologies that we're able to sample, let's quantify the effectiveness. How much sediment load does this reduce? And then people can make the call on, is the bang worth the buck? I know that's a poor answer to your question, but that's kind of our goal.
No, it's not a poor answer. My neighborhood where we did once, 30 years old now. I'll just go see how it's done for them and I'll let you know.
I'd love to.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Kalbas, for being here today. Committee, this is our last official meeting, and so I would like to thank Dusty for doing a great job with all of our audio video, and Taylor whenever she was here. I'd like to thank Kyle, Dylan, Luke, Charday, and Ariana, who were all of our legislative research knowledge on all the budgets that we heard. I'd like to especially thank my committee assistant, Layla Evans, who has had everything always prepared for you. And last but not least, committee members, thank you very much. Your input has been very valuable this session, and I'm grateful. So with that, we are adjourned.
Madam Chair, I'd like to thank you and the vice chair and the minority. This is my first budget.